Good morning. For the first day in a long time. Don't feel like watching from the sidelines.
Welcome to the Core Conversations podcast by Ampelis, where our goal is to help you fuel, use, and rest your bodies in ways that unlock its innate abilities for physical and mental health. My name is Robbie Harmon, and I'll be your host. Welcome to another episode of Core Conversations, where our goal is to help you fuel, use, and rest your bodies in ways that unlock its innate potential for physical and mental health. So we're excited about another conversation. My name is Robbie Harmon. I'm the president of Ampelis, and we've been having conversations about nutrition and mental health and mindfulness principles. And today we're going to come at that from kind of an interesting perspective or an interesting angle that might not necessarily be as intuitive as some of these other conversations about nutrition and mindset and mindfulness. But I think it's equally, if not more, powerful and important, and something that we've been passionate about, certainly at Ampelis. So I'll introduce Lon Henderson, who's with us, and then our topic. First, well, I'll do that in reverse order. We want to talk about the idea of meaning and purpose today with Lon. Meaning and purpose, if you think about the context of the world right now in this conversation, we live in a time with an unprecedented comfort, and technology and economic prosperity. Even there's ups and downs, but considering what we have relative to other generations, it's this unprecedented level of prosperity. And yet we paradoxically have these challenges that we're dealing with that are really frightening. And that's these mental health incidence rates and addiction and suicide and hopelessness and chronic illness and cancer and all of these things, in spite of having more resources, more technological advancement than any society in history. We have all these things that are plaguing our society, including these issues of hopelessness, which we've been passionate about. So in that context, we want to talk about the role that finding and cultivating a sense of meaning and purpose in life can play in really combating and overcoming some of those things and really changing the trajectory with them. So with that context, Lon Henderson is with us. Lon's our founder and CEO, the founder and CEO of Ampelis. Lon's background is multifaceted. He was the best dressed in high school, and
that is the honor I want to be known for.
He's, you can see today he looks good always wherever he is, but he spent bulk of his career in the asset management space. Founded a company called Soltis Investment Advisors, and really in that role of helping people manage their wealth, got to know intimately families and saw some of the great families and some of the challenges that even the great families deal with that have prosperity. And he's done lots of different things as well, whether it's community service, church service that's taken him to Germany and to Australia with his spouse, Carrie. He was involved in creating a performing arts center with other wonderful men down in southern Utah called Tuacahn that just has created opportunity for people to engage with beautiful things in that part of the state of Utah. And most importantly, he's got a remarkable family with 6 children, a loving wife, and I think last time we said, is it almost 27 grandchildren?
26 with 2 on the way.
26 with 2 on the way.
Yeah, soon to be 28.
So Lon has lived a rich life. He's done a lot of things: entrepreneurial successes, professional accolades, community service, family success, and so he comes to this conversation with lots of different perspectives. And so maybe I would just like to start the conversation, Lon. First of all, thanks for supporting all that's going on here and making this happen.
Thank you. You are on the list for speaking at my funeral, so thank you very much. We'll make sure you're slated.
Well, I would love to just start by saying, with all of that background and the different things that you've done, the professional successes you've had, you don't have to be in a place right now where you're just working as hard as you're working. Why at this point in your life and in your career focus on this topic of meaning and purpose with such great intensity?
That's a long answer that would need to be provided. I mean, you ask a question that my wife's asking the same question too. Why are you doing this? But she's as much about meaning as I am, no doubt. In fact, even more so. I think through the experiences that I've had, dating back to the asset management days, started with a national firm, had this idea of a new model that would be more fee-based versus, commission-based. Mm-hmm. Was an early adopter in the what's known today as the registered investment advisory world, managing money by fee. And it was all driven by a different model to reduce the conflict of interest. And I think that experience and also my desire to just kind of for personal development, keep growing, looking at new ideas, has really, I think it's been the catalyst to continue down the path that started with asset management. Very candidly, when I had come back from Australia, we were in a situation.
You and Carrie spent 3 years there,
Yeah.
lifted out of your professional life
Yeah.
for 3 years to go serve in
Yeah.
Australia.
Serve for our faith. And when I came home, I was so touched with affecting people. There's a Chinese proverb, adage that says, if you want to be rich, grow grain. If you want to be wealthy, grow men and women. And I believe that. You say how rich and wealthy and wonderful things, in our life. I mean, we're blessed. And I'm kind of an average, a little bit below average guy from Idaho. Had my own challenges, living in a family, had some dysfunctionality. I had one other brother, but one of the only in the family that actually got a college education. And really came alive from what happened in Germany with the arts, with culture, with learning a new language. And so when I had the wonderful experience, and professionally, I should say, in the area of finance, starting our own firm, glory and appreciation goes to my partner, Hiram Smith, who he and I had some really remarkable times. There were times that we were alone in a foxhole together because of some things in his own life. But from what came from that was just so deep and meaningful. So now, fast forward, my dear friend passed away in 2019. I'd been back from my mission. He gave some really powerful counsel that I know you were there because you helped video about where I should spend my life. And it's in wearing out myself in helping people find meaning. And he was very candid about that. He said, don't worry about the dollar. Don't worry about the financial impact. And thank heavens I got a good president who reminds me that without any margin, there surely will never be a mission.
No mission.
There'll never be a mission. But I believe meaning and the need for meaning and the dearth of meaning in the world today. I really believe meaning is the new money. It's the new currency. A generation of people are waking up not knowing really why they're on this planet Earth. And they may be understanding, or they may understand, or they may be able to be bright. Maybe they're going to the Ivy League. I don't know what they are, but they're people who are really driven, but they're void. They're void of meaning. And you see the condition of the world right now, specifically with mental health. It's tied to meaning. It's tied to meaning. So why am I doing this right now? Frankly, because it's meaningful. And it gives me energy. And I don't like this term of retirement. The only retire I want to get is go from Goodyear to Michelin. Let me get retired and do something new. It keeps me young. And I've got to stay young.
Yeah, I think you're the type that's going to finish his mortal journey with your boots on. You're
die in my boots.
You're going to die in your boots.
Yeah, I hope so.
And keep working.
Yeah.
I know you mentioned earlier you had this interesting experience of going down to your old firm.
Yeah. As
they've now experienced some leadership succession, several iterations of that since you were there, and just gave you time to reflect on this journey that we've been on, and how different it's been for the last 12 years or since you left to Australia and then have now focused on this. So, any reflections on that?
Just the simple ones. I mean, they're on a trajectory from things that we'd started, 30 years ago.
Yeah.
And very economic. It's done well. And it kind of reminded me of something that Hiram said when he was CEO of Franklin Covey. He said, "Do you know how many millionaires I made?" And he just used to say that. How many people I helped become financially independent. And I always loved that. And I think the thing that was most exciting for me is to see how many people are being successful, and so grateful for what they have done for me. I mean, I was part of a team. I loved the team, but I'm so excited that they're doing well. And I have to say, now comes their test. How will they do with the blessing or the curse of prosperity? And that's the thing that really was at the very core before I left my mission, is seeing these wonderful families, first generation, continue to grow wealth, kind of help that second generation. But the kind of the Midas curse that's out there is that multi-generational wealth. And it's in every culture. The rags to riches to rags is real. And to how to perpetuate that whole concept of what was inside the first generation, and to keep that hunger, to keep that learning, to keep that drive, to keep that grit, that's not easy. And I want to be an anomaly. I love my kids. I love them a ton. Boy, I really love their kids. And I want them all to be successful and not to be inflicted with the curse. I can say it that way.
Yeah, I know that thought was, as you mentioned, that was really the catalyst for this whole journey of
Totally, for Ampelis.
It was. And started there at
Soltis. Yeah.
Started at Soltis, and I love hearing the stories of, your kids, even as you're growing this successful asset management firm, thinking that you guys are on the verge of being broke because you were trying to instill in them these principles and values that would lead to resilience and purpose and meaning, and not let them be affected by some of the comforts that you had access to.
That's so true. Even to the point where we never owned a boat. We always shared it with partners. And we'd always tell them, okay, man, the boat's got to be spotless if we're going to give it back to the partner. We can't use it next week. And I have one of my sons who would just scrub it, saying, "Oh, I hope they let us use it next time." All the other things that were done in our home, we didn't have a lot of vacations when it came to spring break. We were always putting in sod. And I wanted to learn to work.
Yeah.
I wanted to learn to sweat. And I think it's blessed them.
Yeah.
I really do. I think it's blessed their spouses. And again, most importantly, I hope it blesses their children.
Well, I think it has. I mean, if anything is a testament to the work of your life, yours and Carrie's, I think it is that you've got these amazing children who are perpetuating all these ideals that you worked really hard to instill in them. And now you see that. I see that a lot, but I think that is a testament more than the firms and other things, is you've been very effective and intentional at that. Like, how do I help cultivate and perpetuate values-based living and meaning and purpose?
Well, that's kind. And it's tough too, Robbie, when you hang with the people who write big checks to their kids.
Yeah.
And you hang with those that, we're all going for spring break and we're going to go to Paris.
It's
and
tempting.
Yeah.
I mean, we were talking about cars on the way down here and just buying cars. It's like,
I know it.
You can do things, and what choices do you make when you can do things? And
It is, I think the more you have, the more self-denial needs to be at the forefront. And not just because you're denying yourself, but I think when you discover how much more fun it is to give and to take what you have and push it outward. I'll never forget one of the first buyouts we had in one of our companies. We had 3 incredible assistants. They're just so great. I love them. I love them today. And when we were making money on this company, we had gone, full cycle on. And it wasn't money that actually our members of our firm made. It was just a couple of us who actually are involved in this private equity. I say this, I want to say it cautiously how I phrase this, but it was so fun to sit around the table and say, who are those that need to be blessed? They won't be blessed because of the cap table, but they were integral to this success. And to write some really large checks, it was one of the most rewarding things I've done. And I'm excited to do it in ongoing projects. So
this context just is giving people a little bit of background about you and some of the places you've been and what's motivated you to lean into this topic. But since 2016, you got home from Australia and really doubled down on what are we going to create that can help perpetuate some of these ideas, whether it's working with families, working with companies, whatever the end user of the kind of customer base is. How do we have conversations about this, and how do we start to put together products and frameworks and principles? And so you've read, and we've all read, but you've just devoured content and research and tried to say, well, how do we, if we know meaning and purpose matters and we want to get good at talking about it and helping people, you've just read everything you can read and thought a lot about it. I'd love to just hear your reflections on that. You've devoured this information. So what are some of the conclusions you started to come to as we thought about, well, how do we even talk about meaning and purpose? And what have you learned from that deep kind of reflection?
Yeah.
And maybe I should say too, as we think about that, like that kind of deep reflection on really big philosophical questions, maybe is part of the challenge in that we're so distracted right now technologically and with consumerism and other fast-paced stuff that we're not pondering those types of things. And really you have deeply, and I'd love to just hear your reflections on going.
Maybe the journey.
Yeah.
Just a little bit on the journey. The journey was so interesting, and we're still on the journey. I mean, come on, we're in it every day, but the journey was motivated, one, because of what we were experiencing with these high net worth families. We actually had some others that were part of the firm that, we had to buy out, or they actually had a different idea of the way they wanted to take the company. And I love them all who were used to be with us. I think the way we're going was a lot more work. Mm-hmm. I think they wanted to be more of a consulting company and, kind of a weekend gig. And man, we wanted this thing to help millions. And, we really have this desire. But Robbie, I mean, you're asking the question, but I will say, I don't know if I'm going to say this, but I'm going to say it. You were integral. You were so integral in that early part of the company because you asked me a question. You said, okay, meaning. And we talked about meaning and what is meaning.
And at first it was cultivate change.
It was
like
cultivate
we want
change.
to change.
Yep, that's right. Cultivate change.
And then we said change to what? And I don't think it might have been you that said meaning and purpose.
I don't know. And I think we were pushing happiness too. And, the Arthur Brooks, I mean, there's David Brooks. I mean, all these great writers of talking about happiness, Martin Seligman with positive psychology. I mean, there was so much that we were exposed to. And so are we talking about happiness? Are we talking about purpose? Are we talking about meaning? What is it? But you ask a question. How would you define meaning? And that really bugged me. I mean, define it. I got to define this thing. Let's just go get it. And said, no, you got to be able to define it. I said, don't ask these kind of questions, would you? I mean, you're the bright guy with 2 masters and all this success in private equity and what you've worked for the healthcare. And I thought, well, I've never thought of that. What is meaning? And it really took us on a path. In preparing for this, I went back and looked at the books. I counted them up. We read in that period of time, and here, I guess most recently, within the last year, we've read 186 books. And these are books ranging from self-development to brain plasticity. I mean, neuroscience. I mean, really broad. We've gone through religion, psychology, philosophy, history. We've just really looked at all different areas and tried to get these different eyeballs on meaning. And I think the thing that happened, and I remember the meeting, you do too, was up at your ranch. We had our whole little team. We broke up into different groups, and we all were writing down, where did we see meaning in our life? Now, this isn't a history book that we are reading. It's our own personal history. And I think the history of our parents or the history of our grandparents. And I think if we looked just to the history of those the closest to us, maybe it's an 80 or 90-year-old grandmother, these elements are found. And so it was that experience that happened there that a methodology, I'll call it a framework, was born. But we were influenced by so many great writers, so many frameworks and strategies about meaning that it was kind of fun when it happened because it was serendipitous. It was kind of like a light bulb that went off and said, this is how we see meaning. And what's been fun for me is I can take our framework, which we'll talk about a little bit later. I can take our framework and hold it up literally as a screen. And when someone comes to me about their life, I can hold that. And again, not to be judgmental, but I can hold that screen over their life and say, ooh, if they're out of balance in these areas, there's some potential for getting some blow-ups, or maybe they're out of balance because they need to emphasize that. They're going to be okay. But it's a little bit of this holy grail to help people to say, where are you in your life? And so anyway, that's, but the thing I think that really happened, and I have to say this, is we began to look at people who lived a meaningful life. I mean, we went through the Nelson Mandelas, or the
Gandhi and Jesus and Helen Keller,
Dalai Lama,
Dalai Lama.
And went all the way through these great heroes of mankind. And you start to put, where were they for fame and glory? Where were they for net worth? Where were they with connecting to a higher power because of developing this deep-rooted spirituality? Martin Luther, I mean, these great people of history. And to me, the essence, I would say, the paragon of meaning in my life is Jesus Christ and how he lived and what he did. And so out of all of the theory and of all of the framework, the most important for me, which I would say was a real X factor to coming to this model, was these great people of history. And that really cemented for me the model.
So maybe as you bring up that experience that we had trying to define this, maybe that creates a good opportunity here to define what we came up with there.
Yeah.
And I do love in the backdrop of what you described with all the books and all the deep thinking and philosophy and volumes of, looking at science and whatever, that felt overwhelming. And I think sometimes one of my takeaways from that experience was sometimes we have these, deep human desires and we overcomplicate our problems and challenges. And we sometimes can overcomplicate the answers by wanting to be too intellectual about it, or whatever, theoretical.
Yeah.
And so the context of that
academic.
The context of that experience was we sat around outside, in nature, in the mountains, and we just had everybody be prepared to share 2 or 3 very specific instances or stories from their life about when they would say they've experienced the most meaning, and people started to just share things.
Yeah.
And so do you want to share?
Yeah. We're actually, like you said, we're outside, perfect setting, mountain area of the Great Wasatch Front. And people were writing these on a big tablet, you were scribe, and everyone were putting down these ideas. And then we took those ideas and we broke up into groups. And then
They told stories. Yeah. We just listed out the stories.
Yeah. I felt meaning when, I made this baseball team and I'd struggled and I'd worked so hard to be able to catch a ball. I was just a little leaguer, and, or my grandmother. I mean, she used to come over and take time with me. Now, these are really simple things, or I have a dog, and whenever I take that dog for a walk at this time of the morning. So these were kind of the simple examples, but everybody broke up into different categories. Now, remember, this is so important to say this. We have the backdrop of all of these books and all of this reading. That was probably only half of the numbers that I'm quoting.
And we're probably a year into this intense study at this point. Like, we had been doing this for a year, thinking about these questions.
Very expensive.
Yeah.
That we were focusing on theory.
Yeah.
I'm a finance guy.
Yeah.
I mean, are we paying for this? But we're going through this because this is this guy who asked about meaning, who's running this interview. So we broke them into these categories, and I was with 2 other people, Justin and Kim, and both incredible people. Of course, Kim's had been on the podcast here. But we began to take these things in our own lives as well as others and started to see where did they kind of gather, or
were there patterns?
Yeah, or coagulate if it were like blood. I mean, where do they just kind of group? Where are the groups? And patterns is the right word. And they began to come into these 3 verticals. And we didn't draw it. In fact, I actually did the drawing. It wasn't a tri-venn.
It was a triangle.
It was a triangle. You're right. But there were things that were tied to development of spirituality. And it was specifically where you would realize that you were part of something bigger. You were connecting to a divine power. And so that was one that was that creating spirituality and connecting to divine.
There's a whole bucket of activities, people talking about whether it was serving and doing volunteer work for their church,
meditation, being in nature.
Yep.
Yeah. Or literally having a religious experience.
Yep.
So that was one area. The next one is the areas where people said, I really felt meaning when I was training for a marathon, or when I was trying to get my PhD, or when I was, qualifying for whatever it may be, but something academic or physical. And so that one was very evident, But what was evident about that area to me is that if they overemphasized, there was narcissism. There was out of balance, I want to be an actor. Now I get stardom and I'm all into myself. So again, another really important one, but just like the divine or spirituality, if I went too far that way, I became a zealot. I became a fanatic.
Yeah.
But then the third one was the one I think and maybe I'm probably the least informed here, but I was really amazed at the third one. And I think it was Kim who pointed it out. He said, the meaningful things when I'm giving to others, or I've got a relationship with my child, or a relationship with my parents, or I just love being with a good friend. And it was all these experiences that happened around others. And it's so fascinating when you look at the dearth of connection in the world, the artificial likes that may come in social media that's not attached with anything that's really tied to the heart or tied with the real human connection. So what came out of it, and it had to develop, of course, with everybody's, abilities and talents, developing spirituality, relationship with others, and this whole idea of self-development, So that became the methodology, and that became the framework. And when you look at development of self, for example, and how that kind of moves into, because you're getting help from a coach and the relationship with the coach and fighting for being something better than you are, and how necessary it is just to reflect and draw on a higher power, and how that divine comes into that, or spirituality comes into that model. It's really fascinating. And I had awareness, which I'll share maybe at the last, but there are some powers that come to person, to relationships, to being part of something bigger. The closer that confluence comes, the more impact in all areas you have.
The confluence of these three different parts
Verticals.
Of meaning.
Yeah.
And I do want to come to that maybe in a little bit, because eventually that conversation what was wonderful about that was it was preceded by a lot of
study, paying the price, and trying to understand.
Rigorous study.
Yeah.
But then the framework to allow us to then talk about it and build products from it and services and try to help people with it was born of very practical, just conversation and telling stories.
Yeah.
And then what's followed that has been further validation. Like you can go into each of those areas and understand the neuroscience of actually being physically present with somebody and having touch instead of getting a like on social media. And this, so there's been a lot of work since to validate the model. But what I just want to emphasize is what was, I think, so powerful about it, and is powerful about it, is that it was born of just practical everyday stories.
Yeah.
It's like, how do you talk to a brother or a sibling or a client about meaning? Well, let's do it in a way that they can easily relate to and have it be supported by science, but not full of scientific jargon that is kind of clouds the just intuitive nature of it.
Yeah, well said. And again, I give you the success and the compliment for making that challenge and making that question. How powerful it is to ask a question and not to come up with a flippant answer and try to move forward, but say, man, that one's really bothering me. We have to answer that. But what I really like about it, and this was brought up by, again, Kim, one of our team members, and I really, really noticed this, is this model actually is kind of a cross-cultural model.
Yeah.
It ties different religions and different faiths. If you worship the higher power the way that you worship, I'm going to celebrate that. If you have those moral fabric to take care of your neighbor and to love your neighbor, Whether you're doing it the way that an Asian would do it, or the Latino would do it, or an American would do it, that's okay. I love that you're doing it the way that you're doing it. But that's what's important, and development itself. So it allows you to take someone who, or be involved with someone who may have totally different beliefs, but can just at least agree to these three areas and start to have some engagement and connection and really respect for each other.
Yeah.
It breaks down barriers, religious, cultural, gender, whatever it is. It breaks down barriers tremendously.
Yeah. Okay. So we want to talk more about that. And one of my takeaways, I'm sitting and just reflecting on that as you're reminding me of some of those experiences, is that sometimes I think we overcomplicate
Yes.
some of the answers to our problems.
Yeah, I agree.
I
agree.
And we do it because we live in this era of unprecedented access to knowledge and science and research and brilliant people that we have in our pocket, instant access to.
Library of Congress.
And so I just think we get confused and sometimes overcomplicate powerful ideas that are really quite simple.
Yeah.
So do you have a comment?
Yeah, I was going to make a comment. So I think if something's real or true, and it's, we hear the term about, we use evidence-based. This is evidence-based. And I really like that, but I've got some examples of things that are evidence-based, but they're not time-tested. They may be evidence, but they may have manipulated the evidence, or they may have done it in a certain way. But to be time-tested is, I think, the real challenge. And you know what? I'm going to read something. Do you mind?
Please.
I was reading this when I was coming in. See if I can find it. It's on my iPad. Yep. I was reading it. That jumped out to me on something that was iconic in this model. And this is what I wanted to say. When you hear something that's true, and it's part of a model or part of a system, there's going to be repeating opportunities you'll have to reground yourself in that truth. It just keeps hitting like, wow, there's more here. You've only got an inch deep and a mile wide. Come back to that inch and go deeper. There's so much more discoveries. After that experience, I was talking to my daughter and thinking through, and this usually happens with me. I'll call someone and say, hey, I was thinking about this. And then all of a sudden something else pours in that is another piece of truth. But this happened actually twice with this one daughter. But I was reading Man's Search for Meaning again. That was one of the very early books,
Viktor Frankl.
There's been millions and millions, over 18 million copies of that book, and 50 languages, I think. It's just an incredible book. And I'll go a little bit on this. It's made so much impact on me because a lot of those philosophers in the 1800s and 1900s were Austrian or German. And having served, a mission in Germany, whenever I hear these great, whether it's Sigmund Freud or Friedrich Alred, I think it was, or Viktor Frankl, they were kind of building on each other. But Viktor Frankl came up with this concept of meaning as a differentiator in affecting mental health and the creation of logotherapy. But I was reading about him, and of course he's known mostly at age 37 going to these concentration camps, living with his parents and his wife, who, by the way, all pass away.
And he lived in, Viktor Frankl, for context, he's Polish psychiatrist, I think, or psychologist, I think.
Working in Vienna.
And World War II era.
A neurologist and a psychiatrist, yeah.
World War II era, okay.
Yep, World War II. But he had actually attempted to get a visa. And he was granted a visa right at the time of the uprising, of the Nazi nation and Hitler and the Third Reich. And here he's got a free ticket. He's got a ticket to go to
leave and go to America, escape the
carnage, the challenges, this caustic, war, this empire that was taking over that part of Europe. But he was faced with what I'm going to do. What am I going to do? And he knew his parents would probably go because they were at the time were taking the elderly, Jewish society into these concentration camps. But he could see that his mom and dad would be next. So he says, what am I going to do? And so that context is, if I'm reading the right thing, is what I wanted to just kind of point out. Okay, let me read this. He said, That same year, Frankl faced a decision that changed his life. With both a rising career and the threat of the Nazis looming over him, Frankl had applied for and was granted a visa to America. By that time, the Nazis had already started taking Jews away to concentration camps, focusing on the elderly first. Frankl knew that it was only a matter of time before the Nazis came to take his parents away. He also knew that once they did, he had a responsibility to be there with them to help them. Still, he was tempted to leave for America, where he would find both interesting safety and professional success. Okay? We're talking about meaning. Frankl was at a loss of what to do. He set out for St. Stephen's Cathedral in Vienna to clear his head. Listening to the organ music, he repeatedly asked himself, should I leave my parents behind? Should I say goodbye and leave them to their fate? Of course, it was his wife as well. He didn't know at the time that also be taking his wife. Where did his responsibility lie? He was looking for a hint from heaven. When he returned from home, he found it. A piece of marble was sitting on the table. His father explained that it was from the wreckage of one of the synagogues that the Nazis had destroyed. The marble contained the fragment of one of the 10 Commandments, the one about honoring your father and mother. With that, Frankl decided to stay in Vienna, forego whatever opportunities for safety and career advancement awaiting him in the United States. He put aside a life of comfort and to serve his family and later the other prisoners in the camp. He called this, that, as I read, that hint from heaven. So when you look at his life, which later was maybe more serendipitous, he had the hint from heaven, relationship for his family, but it ended up being one of the most idyllic experiences for career development to help prisoners to get through the concentration camp like any other thing. So I read this. I was talking to my daughter. I said, I could have read just 5 paragraphs, and understood it better in Man's Search for Meaning and not have spent the money we spent and the time that we spent. But you know what? It's that journey. I'm so grateful for that journey because it means more.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No,
thanks for entertaining me.
No, that's good. I think that's illustrative of you come up with a model that it was just intuitive. And then there's since been a lot of subsequent reading and validation from whether it's, Emily Esfahani Smith, who I think you were reading.
Yeah, I was reading her quoting, of course, Man's Search for Meaning.
And she's at University of Pennsylvania, I think, with Martin Seligman and that whole crew that comes out of there. But so just like the subsequent years of study, really validating a very simple, intuitive
concept.
model.
Yeah.
So shifting gears a little bit, the
Okay.
company now takes that backdrop. It's along the path here has done work with companies and with high net worth families, helping them cultivate a deeper sense of meaning and purpose.
Yeah.
But now, and starting with addiction recovery 4 or 5 years ago or something, and continuing today, in outpatient depression and anxiety treatment clinics and other things that we're doing, has focused on mental health. And I think acknowledging more and more, we're learning that some of the challenges that we're really wrestling with as a society, with whether it's ADHD or depression or anxiety, things like this, they may not entirely be a result of some kind of biochemical deficiency in the brain, but maybe related to these topics of meaning and purpose.
Yep.
So what reflections do you have on that? The role of meaning and purpose in starting to address some of the issues that society is wrestling with in these areas of mental and emotional health.
Yeah. Well, we won't go here in this podcast. I would invite you to do this with maybe I'd love to team on someone to bring in as far as neuroscience, but there's been so much debunking now of this whole concept of what was behind the pharmaceutical empires with SSRIs and, the whole chemicals of the brain. And that has just been thrown out, the window, although there is still, a purpose for some of that, but
we're not anti-medication, but it's not, it's not.
Yes.
It was maybe promoted based on a false premise.
Yep. And we've seen, that whole science now to change. And I'm shocked still at how many people that are so, focus on that being the solution, to mental health. But we were involved, as you may remember, and of course you were driving this initiative with the addiction recovery clinics. We took a holistic approach. And I think what's fun about this journey is we've seen these few elements of things that we've done, and sometimes we dove into them just for a year or 18 months or whatever it may be, but we saw such remarkable success and actually paid the bills. We've been positive cash flow on just doing these special projects, even to taking meaning into the workplace with creating these cultures for corporations. We've been given pieces of companies because we've turned around their culture and it was so profitable for the company. So we've had a lot of little experiences. But in the addiction recovery, what really hit me, and it was also another serendipitous, I'm going to call it, experience I had with my own health. I was dealing with some issues with high cholesterol and whatever, and I started to move my diet into more of a plant-based diet and being really more sensitive to food as fuel. And, it's funny, when that came up, there was someone who said, a good mechanic. And when we were talking about it and we're laughing, he said, this car was backfiring. And he said, I was taking it in, and first thing the mechanic said, what kind of fuel are you burning? And I hear that and I'm thinking, that is what a good mechanic would say. But do doctors say that about us? We may be backfiring mentally, we may be backfiring physically, but whatever's happening, do they say, what kind of fuel are you burning? So our holistic approach at the addiction recovery was not only on some of these theories, but we also had other treatments we think were, ahead of their day. I mean, we used some treatment of amino acids. Of course, we were doing things with ketamine. We're doing things with ketamine. But also we had part of our methodology was rooted in things that would be tied to developing spirituality. They were going outside, they were meditating, they were going on hikes. There was I could say a spiritual side of what they were doing there to come back in connection with themselves, but also in self-development, because there was health, there was exercise, they were moving, they were doing some things that some of them hadn't done for decades. But we were also attacking the stomach. We're attacking the gut. We're attacking good eating habits. And many of our people who left didn't really want to go. I mean, they knew they had to. Time was to move on. They were going through this process. But they were feeling so good, they were worried about going into their new environment. And the stats as well as I do, but where the industry sees like 15 to 20% sobriety after a year through all these myriad of programs that are addiction recovery, we were seeing 70%. We were knocking it out of the park, at least at that point, for the stuff that we knew, but we weren't able to connect with enough people. We weren't able to scale to enough. So we made that pivot. But the lessons learned from that experience are priceless, But the one that I'm emphasizing is that there is a connection, and we've talked about it on other podcasts, but there's that connection between mind and gut.
Yeah, it's interesting. And then thinking about this broader context, you defined meaning as development of self, relationships with others, and cultivating spirituality or some kind of connection to divine is where we originally started with that, the phrasing of it anyway.
Yeah.
And realizing as we've gone into the research and the literature and now actually had years of operating clinics, there's a role for medicine in helping people, but the root cause of many of the challenges we're dealing with societally are not some kind of hardwired biochemical deficiency in the brain. We haven't evolved as a species in the last 2 decades to somehow have, a third of the population dealing with these new challenges, but rather they're maybe a result of chronic or acute life stressors and challenges that largely can be addressed and remedied through a focus on one of those 3 or all 3 of those areas of development of self, which could include the brain-gut connection and nutrition, and developing a deeper sense of spirituality that gives your life context, or really investing in improving some relationships, and realizing that gives us a toolkit or a framework to now engage and just get our bodies and our brains and our emotions functioning the way they were
healthy.
Yeah, just to be healthy,
level set.
And it's not that you're broken. It's not that you need some kind of chemical to insert into your body to feel that way. That might help you get to where you can engage in those things. But I think the science that once was driving the rise of these SSRI medications and other things is proving to be not as robust as once thought.
Yeah. And to add to the discovery and also the pain of that discovery is healthcare's focus in reimbursing and paying
Yes.
and investing in the health of America, specifically the health of the individual, is all in these areas where we're not finding the science, we're not finding the perpetual movement of getting better. We're not seeing it there. And so it takes some pioneers to go out there to say, we're going to push against this headwind to
regardless
come up
of where
with
the
real
money
source,
is.
and regardless where we're going to figure a way to help this, to be monetarily successful.
Yeah.
And it's been a real press because you're fighting the institutions on the planet. But when people apply these principles, when people apply the things that we're actually coming out with, it is a game changer. And I love what you said earlier. These verticals, the framework really is a tool. I'll call it framework again. It's a framework to aid us in creating certain products. It aids us in creating certain tools. And our toolbox has come from understanding those three areas. And I just love to think that those areas actually go back to the beginning of time.
Yeah.
I talked about the essence of meaning with Jesus Christ. I talk about a real hero of mine like Viktor Frankl. And there's many others that I could quote, but you'll find their life rich in those three areas.
In all of the big world religions, it's kind of ubiquitous,
Yes,
whether you're
it is ubiquitous.
in Islam or Buddhism or Hinduism or Christianity,
all four.
you see,
Yep.
again, that your comment about the filter, the screen through which you can look at all of these different ideas, they all emphasize all of those elements.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
I love that. So let's talk about that for a minute then.
Okay.
You mentioned earlier, originally on the big
Piece of
post-it
paper,
note,
post-note, yeah.
we had a triangle that had development of self, relationship with others, and then connecting with divine is what we called it back then, but
Yeah.
cultivating spirituality. And eventually that evolved into a tri-venn, and that was purposeful because of the illustration of the intersection of those things. And you mentioned, kind of lightly referenced, the need for balance and seeing the confluence
Yeah.
of those things coming together to really optimize your experience with meaning. Maybe talk about the importance of balance. Can you always be in perfect balance, or why is it important to have all three of those elements present?
Yeah.
Any reflections on that?
Yeah. Years ago, I had a thing I did with our children. We were all trying to get ready to grow. To hike a major peak. We had numerous peaks that we had planned to hike first. And what it was is we're going to go to hike, Kilimanjaro. And so all the kids were excited, and everybody, said, well, we're going to first do Nogus, and we're going to do down in St. George, something in Zion National Park. And we had these little pre-hikes, and they were to get trained. And then the year that we're hiking, of course, Kilimanjaro, we had COVID. And so that's one of those things that didn't happen in our family, which I regret, and we'll maybe tackle it another time. But as we were thinking of these opportunities to climb and prepare, we're going through this methodology, in that latter part of our training. And when I would think of balance, I'd always think of balance as an athlete would think of balance. This is how you sit in the box. This is how you, when you're batting, this is where you're in the batter's box. This is how you sit or you stand at the foul line. You want to be balanced. This is how you actually shoot a foul shot. So balance is so important. But the more I look back at my life, there were times I was uber involved in personal development, going to school, a new career, learning, asset management and efficient frontier and negative correlation and standard deviation and all these principles that, were some of the components of asset management, which I loved. But I was over involved in one of those verticals. And then I started thinking of the time when I was over involved with spirituality. To leave your business that you had created, for 3 years and just say, good luck, guys, hope we do well, and not call on a regular basis, leave your family. For one thing that you believe, I think there's a level of commitment there. I think it shows a little bit of commitment, but I was surely overbalanced, So I started thinking, that's not the kind of balance we're talking about. And then I saw a picture of a mountain climber. He's going up this cliff and he's got a carabiner here and he's got a rope here. And sometimes he's more on the right leg, sometimes he's more on the left. Other times he's reaching up forward. And that might be a little bit extreme, but it is that kind of balance. And you have to be willing to say, I'm overly focused on this area right now. Recognize that and lever the other two, to aid you on that area where you need to be overbalanced. And as you do that, like a mountain climber, like someone scaling a cliff, to use the extreme, you'll find that there are times you can be a little bit out of balance, but you can't stay on the cliff forever. You just can't. It doesn't work. You can't be, as an artist, I know a few artists, specifically musicians and actors and others, and, you keep them in the spotlight forever. I think they rewire their brain. I think they get a little clunky and funky. And there's some things that start to happen, and they start to do weird stuff, that's just kind of again, this simple guy is saying it this way. And so any one of those, you need to come out of the spotlight, or you need to come out of the self-development. You need to come out of where you could become a zealot, and you need to come back to ground zero and say, okay, where do I have a little bit of a deficit? Where do I have a dearth that needs to be addressed? And the nice thing about finding that shortage or that weakness, it brings in that great principle, which I just cherish. And that's that principle of humility, and don't believe everything you read in the paper. Okay.
Especially about yourself.
Most importantly, about yourself is what I wanted to say. Don't believe what the praise and all the accolades, just take a pill and remember it. All the people are putting their pants on the same way, and just be grateful and give praise to those around you. Give praise that you have some abilities. Give praise, most importantly, to the master, to God himself. And so that is how I would describe balance. And I think that allows people to not be so hard on themselves. I can get through this. I'm not always going to be running 100 miles an hour, and I can make this work.
One of the powerful ideas is, we've talked about this over the years, has been simply acknowledging that the framework, so think of a tri-venn again, these three areas, and in the intersection, we'll talk about this is the sweet spot when you have a confluence of all these three things, and you might have to have an intense period of focus in one or the other at some point, but even just having the model allows you to think thoughts, right? When you have a framework or vernacular or words, that allows you to think thoughts about a topic differently. And so, even if you're over focused in an area, and I think you've been really good at this, and one of the things that I really admire about you is you've been able to integrate different parts of your life. So even when you are intensely focused on something, it doesn't feel as out of balance. And in other words, for example, if you're training for a marathon and you've got to spend an extra couple hours running every day, that's a real development of self-focus. But how much more meaningful would that be if you spent the first 30 minutes with one of your kids and you had them run with you? You can just having the model in your mind allows you to think of creative ideas to not feel out of balance in periods of intense focus. And so, trying to integrate all three, even in those times of focus, is a powerful concept.
I don't know if you're being kind of smart by bringing up marathon. I almost died in my first marathon.
I know the story.
After 4 or 5 liters of IV and almost dying, having an afterlife experience. But you're right. I ran with kids at the very first 30 minutes of my 2, 3, 4 hour training, whatever it was. But that is true. That is true. It allows you to keep that perspective. Yeah, good point.
So balance matters, and that confluence is intentional and powerful. Just to remember as a takeaway, I think, to think creatively about, hey, you're going through something, but don't lose sight of these other areas, and try to find creative solutions, not to do more, but to simply integrate some of those other elements of meaning into that which you need to focus on.
That you're saying is the way you'd look at the model as being reflective in retrospect. But I think the important part of that model too, and I'm doing it right now, which I'm not really happy to say I'm having great success, but it's when you're looking at certain areas that you're saying, I can do more in this area because I'm doing so much more. And my wife really sees where I'm focused. Okay. I mean, she's so great. I mean, I married, Mary Poppins. I mean, she is unbelievable. And she has her own Mary Poppins purse. But she will go ahead and say, honey, are you spending too much time there? Are you thinking about this? And when you notice that you may be spending that time, you are more aware of setting goals in other areas, of saying, I really need to develop this. I mean, one of mine is that I'm going to play the guitar. Now that's, on a video here, I've got to do it. And I have been doing it. I'm trying to, I have a goal here to be somewhat of a musician in this area. And that's really meaningful to me right now. There's certain things in the agrarian world that I want to do. I grew up in an agrarian, home for a certain part of my life, and I want to get back to some of those roots. And so there's some of these things that I think will also bless this next generation. So yes, it helps with reflection. Yes, it helps in retrospect, but it also helps looking forward.
Yeah.
And I think planning,
for sure.
Goal setting, and also getting some inspiration about where someone else might be telling you that's not around you, that you can hear all the time, to give you a prompt to say, you might want to think of this.
Yeah. It is such a helpful, and that's what I was trying to communicate is it's a helpful problem solving thing more than just a retrospective. It's I feel out of balance, but I can't change my focus on this area. At least acknowledging the model allows you to think creatively about how you can integrate other aspects of meaning into that which you need to focus on. And so even though you haven't changed that intense focus, you feel more complete, more balanced.
We're talking about meaning and where it's found, and that's been a lot of discussion. But I mean, from our model expanded. Yeah. That was the beginning. And we also want to say, how do you cultivate meaning? How do you cultivate it? And this is indigenous in how we operate. It's kind of our operating, what would you call it? Operating system. It's kind of, we used to laugh, it's kind of the Intel inside, or Intel's gone. I have to talk about a few other kind of great operating systems, but it's the operating system that you also need if you're going to find meaning. And that was this process where when you're trying to set a goal, or when you're trying to make a change, there is a process you go through where there's this awakening. You'll have a discovery. You'll have something that happens where you're having what we'll call this aha experience. And as soon as you have that aha experience, our other process, or I should say our other system, is that you need to start to align to these principles that are time-tested, and they are evidence-based. And that's that alignment. So there's
having some kind of systems in place that allow you to operationalize the principles in your life.
Exactly. So after you have that awakening, you have this alignment. Now you've got a way to put some, systems into place. And I always use the analogy. I'd love it. It's like taking this young tree that has this awakening, it bursts through the ground, and now you put some stakes around it so it can actually start to grow straight. You help it, because there's going to be a lot of wind that's going to blow that thing over. But at the end of that awakening and alignment, you start to see fruit. You start to see success. Things that are true actually bring fruit. By their fruit you shall know them. And so when that fruit comes, most of the time we think the fruit is only to consume. It is to consume. It's to consume and enjoy. But also that fruit is used to refertilize those roots. And so that fruit will renew again as it falls from the tree, goes into the ground, starts to be regenerated into those roots. And so that awake, align, and renew, that circular process, we find kind of indigenous or interacting constantly with our model of it, where meaning is found.
So what are some of the I'll use the fruit word again you just used, but somebody goes through an intentional period of saying, I'm going to cultivate more meaning and purpose. And what are some of the fruits of that? When a person, whether it's personally, professionally, with physical health, mental health, what happens when somebody is really purposeful about creating a deeper sense of meaning in their life?
I think the first one, and I think it's tied really to the awakening, is that people are going to have clarity. I mean, they just start seeing things clearer, and the clarity is not so much just so focused to move forward. It is for that purpose, to have focus and move forward. But sometimes the clarity is to be able to say no to other things.
Yeah.
And it's that clarity to say, no, this is a distraction. I do think there's so many things out there that are counterfeits to meaning, that have the look and the smell and the taste of meaning, but they're truly counterfeit, that clarity is really, really needed. I think after the clarity, and you really can see, with some 2020 and even better than 2020, even in some regards, microscopically, I think what comes next is action. It builds confidence and you're ready to engage. Whenever we go through this process, whether it's corporate or family or whatever it may be, there's that side of action that they are ready to engage. And that engaging is energizing because they're making a directional, step that they know is progressive in its direction. And I use the term, I think I used it last time on one of our podcasts, but it's that concept about if I make a step forward and I go up that riser and I'm on a new tread, I just have higher vision. And the more steps I go up, the greater my vision and the easier it is to have the right perspective. I think following action, which is probably why I'm still here. And that is when that occurs, you develop a sense of love, just rooted love for the people you're working with, love of self, which is so not found in the world. And that's what's missing so much, that love, whether it's for others, for a higher being, or for yourself, is, I think, what comes. And I think that love is illustrated in that operating system when you start to give and serve and share. And that's evident of that part of that operating system.
Yeah, I love that. I didn't even think of taking the conversation here, but you're talking about this idea of, we actually trademarked the term KMIs, key meaning indicators instead of key performance indicators, to say, how do we know if we're investing in trying to create more meaning in our family or in our company? We ought to be looking for things that maybe they're self-reported observations of experiencing more clarity about what matters. So just to summarize, more clarity about what matters most, action towards those things, and greater love for self and others. Yeah. And that's totally the fruit. And it's been interesting to also see, as we've tried to understand how to have conversations with potential, particularly corporate clients in these areas, to say, is there an ROI for us to engage in this type of work? To see some of the emerging literature from some of the good thinkers who've now said, okay, there is data. Companies that have workforce, companies that invest in helping their people cultivate a sense of meaning or purpose, not necessarily tied to the work they're doing, but just in their lives, end up outperforming their peers by a significant margin. We're
talking about hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of basis points.
Yeah. There's a particular study that we're exposed to at a symposium we attended at Harvard that show it was a collaboration between some researchers and professors at Harvard and Oxford, and they took, I think it was Glassdoor data.
It was,
some of this publicly available data from publicly traded companies, and they showed that those companies that scored high on 4 key metrics related to purpose and meaning and happiness in life, they outperformed their peers over a 10-year period by like 56% or something. It was remarkable. And then the same holds true as we've seen in an individual life, in terms of people who have a deeper sense of meaning and purpose, and whether they're, and you can see elements of it with data about religious or faith traditions, or marriages where you've got thriving relationships. All of these things lead to higher physical health, or improved physical health, better rates of mental health, and other challenges. We talk about mental health and chronic illness. Most of those things are positively impacted when you invest in deeper meaning, self-development, relationships with others, and connecting with some kind of spirituality or spiritual practice.
And we've used that, as you know, we've used that in the corporations that we've consulted with, and it's been very profitable for them. And it's, I'm just going to say, kept the light on, lights on for us. But what it's also done is continued us going down this journey of saying, what else is out there? And that's kind of what's led us to, now to the whole,
the focus on nutrition.
And on the gut and that whole area of the gut. But I wanted to point those out. I wanted to make that emphasis because it's just been another mile marker on this journey of truth, and why this meaning is so important.
So do you have, I want to come back to the nutrition conversation if we can, as we close the conversation, but I would love if you can just share a story. We're trying on all of these conversations to have, we'll call them little by little stories that just illustrate
framework or how it's in process.
in practice.
Yeah, I've had so many experiences with young men, young women when I was in Australia. I've had so many experiences with children. My daughter had reminded me one, I think she had talked about on her own podcast, but she had talked about the time where, and I have a little different memory than she does because you do as a dad always, but we were out in this rose bush, and she was looking at these roses and she was wanting to do things that 14-year-olds didn't need to do, or 13, whatever age she was, and all these things that she was trying to push the envelope. And it was a simple story about, let's go get these 2 roses. I remember we put in 2 little glasses, 2 roses, and one I tried to open, and the other we just let bloom naturally. And it was almost sad to watch just a few days of what the one that you forced to open, what it did to the development of that rose, and it made an impact on her. And so I was thinking of other stories where one of these principles or all 3 were used, but it's ironic. 2 nights ago, I was reading my family history. My father's father, so my grandfather's name was Louis Edgar Henderson. My name's Lon Edgar Henderson. I never met him, don't know anything about him outside of what's written in journals. And last of a big family, he had 9 children. Robbie, he was just a man who lived meaning. His whole life. He went from one thing to the other, selling grain, selling tractors, never being able to make it, and finally got this core economics in his life that he could raise these 9 children, just as we have the Great Depression. And he loses his home because of, I think it was 1 or 2 mortgage payments they couldn't make. And of course, they took the home, the debt provider, and of course, it's now worthless. So they didn't get pennies on the dollar. I mean, we know the mistakes that were made during the Great Depression economically. But he moved his family to this rundown place outside of where they lived in Aramo to Pocatello, Idaho. There they were in a rundown home. He had 9 children I think it only had like 3 bedrooms or something. It was a disaster. But what stood out to me is how he aided this family in the worst of economic condition. When you know the why you're doing something, the how is less important. The how doesn't overwhelm you when you really know the why. And he was doing the why for these 9 children. Now, who would have known out of 9 children, 5 marriages came in a few block radius? And these weren't average Joe marriages. I mean, these were rock star marriages. He was a leader of his parish, his ward, as a bishop. And the war comes. The war breaks out. My father, the number 6 ball that Roosevelt read, a number that represented someone in every county to be drafted, was his number. And the others in the family all said, we'll go in the Army too. We don't want you to be alone. There were 5 through the sons and 1 son-in-law that left that family to go fight in World War II. A big flag with 5 stars was put in the window. And he made a promise to these young men. You do those things that are moral. You live according to those principles that you believe. You stay close to us through letters. You do these things that are important, again, core to their faith, core to their belief. And every one of you were returned. Now, I know many great families that lost these soldiers and lost members of the family in war or combat. But for some reason, all 5 of those came back. And the rest of his life with that family, he gave everything. The great success of my father was seen because of his father. The great success of what he became, I believe, was because of those early roots of my grandfather. My father told me often, Grandpa died with $2.67 in his pocket. That's all he had, $2.67. They couldn't fit everybody in that funeral. He wore out his life for others and lived a meaningful life. I didn't even know that as well as I know it today because of some family journals and history I've been studying. So I don't know, maybe I'll die with $2.67. Maybe that's my plan. I have to, index it for inflation. It might be a little bit more than that. But I'm excited to wear out myself with you and others who are part of this journey of figuring out how we can help people through all the tools, not only get healthier, but live a meaningful life, because that is the core. And we're doing that in our clinics right now, our mental health clinics. We're doing that in contracts that we take, and we're really doing it in this micronutrient that we're so excited about.
Yeah, that's a great story. It reminds me of the idea of, all of us should really have some of our resume goals and virtues, vision, I guess is the word,
Vision.
that we should be pursuing. And, economic success, it matters to be able to provide for a family and
Absolutely.
have the needs of life. And that is a part, of meaning and health and wellness. And the companion though to that we need to remember is the eulogy vision. It's your grandpa. It's what do you hope
people say about
you? How do they feel about you when you pass?
That's so true. I've said this before, and I love my industry of asset management, but I don't want on my tombstone, he understood negative correlation in the efficient efficient correlation and the efficient frontier. I can't even say it now, but those things that are elements of really good asset management. I mean, there's other things I want on that tombstone. Now, as I say that, I'm going to say just as quickly, thank heavens for people, honest people in that industry who help people live, which our mission was at Soltis, live life's most important endeavors, to do the things that they want to do. And that's so important. But when people have a sense of meaning in any occupation, and it's meaningful that their occupation, the research, we've taught this many times, if it's just a little bit of what's meaningful to them, I think the number's like 20-something%, 22-something%. But what's meaningful to them, they're also working for a company for what's meaningful for the company. But there's a connection between the two for that employee. Wow.
Yeah, it doesn't take
much.
It doesn't take this is one of the risks one of the pushbacks we had maybe when we first started doing some of these engagements was this feels so overwhelming. Oh, we've got to transform our life and big picture changes that just feel hard. It's like, I got to be a better dad. I need to be a better better in my career, and I need to change my fitness, and all those things can feel overwhelming. But I think what you're illustrating is just a little focus in any one of those areas that is something that is rooted in a deep sense of purpose that's intentional, can start to yield tremendous fruit in terms of energy and productivity and creativity and all sorts of things.
Our saying, little by little, a little becomes a lot.
Right.
We used to talk about the time value of money and how powerful it is with compounding interest. And we, of course, used to use in our training that compounding effect of just change, time value of change. And how one change after another, what it does. And so if we can get someone to change just a little bit,
focus on
consistently do it, the small, simple things,
The other thing that came to mind when you were talking, just to round out the conversation about the kind of eulogy vision versus resume vision and professional, economic, other success. I remember my dad gave a talk in church before he went to go do some missionary work. And he said something to the effect of, have you ever seen a hearse pulling a U-Haul trailer? And he's like, you don't take anything with you. At the end of life.
I like that.
At the end of life, you don't, like what matters?
Yeah.
Is it your grandpa? You can die with $2.91, but have a lifetime worth of people who you've impacted and built relationships with and left a legacy, and what really matters, and I think the other thing that's just coming to my mind as you're sharing some of these stories goes back to where we started, which is, I think part of our problem right now societally is that we've removed the emphasis on really pondering these types of things. We've removed teaching ethics and we've removed
even from our vocabulary.
It's not in our literature anymore. Like there's actual interesting studies we found that show that. But it's removed from our schools. We're de-emphasizing the importance in the societal conversation about pondering these big questions of life and meaning and moral questions.
Yeah.
And I mean, is it any wonder? Like, what do people have to give them a deep sense of purpose if we've never taught them how to think about it? And so then something stressful happens, and no wonder they break down, and no wonder there's challenge, and they don't have resilience because they don't have the tools or the vocabulary, or they've never had somebody help them take the time to ponder those things, so they develop some kind of conviction that gives them a foundation.
Yeah. It is the engine.
Yeah.
It is the engine. And it's also the compass.
Yeah.
without an engine, without a compass, kind of tough. We see, and this is anecdotal, but you see these, what is he, Tal Ben-Shahar, he used to be at Harvard and then Columbia. You look at Arthur Brooks, the phenomenon at Arthur Brooks, Laurie Santos at Yale. I mean, these are all happiness podcasts, happiness courses, happiness curriculum, and they're blowing up in these universities. You have Ivy League students, and those Ivy League students that you're recruiting to come to your school, they might be impressive, and they're worrying about quantum physics or, the next wave in AI, but they're hungry for this meaning.
Yeah.
They're hungry for purpose. They're hungry for happiness.
The reason there's a reason those are the most popular and oversubscribed classes at these big secular universities.
Exactly.
People are hungry for that. It's a void that we intuitively feel the need to fill.
Yeah. It's right at our fingertips.
So I mean, over the years, we've had an opportunity to interact with some of those people.
We have, and I mean, as close as you and I are. I mean, we've been in conferences. They've been
spent time in a conference room with some of these great minds and great thinkers, just really good souls.
Yep.
Arthur Brooks being one of them.
Iconic.
Maybe share, and we've been influenced by him in a very positive way. The things that he writes and teaches, and the way he's able to talk about topics of meaning and happiness and spirituality in a way that just is not offensive to anybody.
Yeah.
But maybe,
and he's also been, maybe just to say, and he's also been so giving.
Yeah.
I mean, he has reached out to a real pro, Yeah. He's been willing to share and to invite and to, participate. Yeah. But
so maybe share, I mean, any takeaways or reflections on some of those interactions with these really preeminent thinkers in this space of happiness and meaning?
I think the thing that's probably most salient in my mind is how so much of this thought came from some of the thinkers that we've already mentioned today. Viktor Frankl, I mentioned Martin Seligman, which is the pioneer of positive psychology. And although they may have different ways that they're addressing it, again, I'm going to use my lens.
Yeah.
It still comes back to alignment on some very, very basic principles. And I think they've been highlighted so much, which I'm saying, man, some of these guys are such rock stars in this space. It's been highlighted because their principles they've been able to share with some really, really large audiences. And secondly, audiences that were extremely hungry. I think there's more of this I do believe, I think there's more dearth, more shortage of meaning in a downtown metropolitan area that's challenged with so many things, including the rat race that you have to get involved in as a hamster running on that wheel. And I think it's probably not only personified, but it's just accelerated. And those are the centers that they're in. I think there's a lot more shortage of meaning there than I might find if I run up in a little valley up in Idaho where they're still on a tractor and they're doing some things that are just basic around earning a living. Or I could say Wyoming, I could say Montana, I could say Utah. So that's been one of the issues. These spotlights are partly because of demographics, and of course, partly because of the reading and the study and the qualifications of those authors and writers and promoters of their own model. But society is creating greater challenges in a societal way because of the demographics of the planet specifically. You might have other observations. I'd love to hear what you're thinking there.
Oh, I just have loved, part of me, it goes back to something that your old business partner Hiram said when we recorded a video. He passed of cancer.
Yeah.
And before he passed, recorded a video of just life reflections and something that he could share with his family. And one of the things he said is, regardless of what you believe about Jesus, he was a faithful Christian man.
Yeah.
But he said, regardless of what you believe about Jesus, who he was, or if he was divine or not, your life is better if you do the things he taught. You're happier if you do the things that Jesus taught. Yeah. And that's been one of the interesting things for me, like even talking to Arthur Brooks, is that he said, I'm just using secular words to talk about the teachings of Jesus.
Yeah.
And again, whether it's Christianity or it's found in Islam or whatever, there's these spiritual things. And you talked about being things that are time tested rather than evidence based, and both are important.
Both are important.
But time tested is maybe even more powerful because you can see the words and teachings of a man who lived until his early 30s, have influenced people on the planet Earth for millennia, for now thousands of years.
Yeah.
And they stand the test of time. And I think what's fun is to realize that all the best thinkers are coming back to
The most basic of principles.
the most basic principles that have been taught for centuries and centuries and centuries. And they're now proving it out with science. You know, they're showing that people who are more generous and giving and charitable, they happen to thrive emotionally and spiritually and economically.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So you give, you gain.
Yeah.
Well, we've heard that across lots of different religions.
Bread on the water.
Yeah. And that was one of my reflections on that is just, it goes back to this idea of maybe we overcomplicate the answers to some of our societal problems.
Yeah.
And maybe they're found in just going back to things that we've been taught by our grandpas and things that we've been taught by scripture and other things. And it's saying, how do we apply that in a modern world?
Yeah.
And how do we remind ourselves and the institutions in which our children are being educated that those things matter.
Yeah.
They matter for the prosperity of society and the health of the individual.
Yeah. The magic, I think, in this whole thing of really making change is having these principles, having a framework, but then having a system that aids you in making the change.
Yes.
We must be change architects.
Yeah.
We must be change engineers at our firm, at Ampelis. When someone, whether they're using the micronutrient, whether they're coming to a teaching or a seminar or a corporate event, I mean, change must be the concluding benefit. That am I going to change? I mean, there's all this great science and great research about why seminars don't work.
Yeah.
I mean, that was part of our early, again, an HBR article that you had sent me. But the challenge is they don't have a change architecture to actually make something stick. And that's the really exciting thing about what we're doing also in this whole micronutrient space, is we're building an infrastructure that people can change. And people are coming to this health thing on all different levels.
Yeah.
I mean, some are going to be taking what we're recommending, which science has been able to create, all organic, whole food, no synthetic. They're going to take this, and some of them are going to go through a little bit of difficulty maybe for, a week or two. But that change will be lasting. They're going to get more energy. They'll start to attack their sleep. They're going to do things in methodology that will get them closer to optimal functioning. And as they get that more optimal functioning starting in their stomach, the brain will follow.
Yeah.
The brain will follow. It's kind of hard to go the other direction that we're discovering. I'm going to get my brain right, but I'm still using the wrong fuel.
It's like Maslow's hierarchy of needs in many ways. It's like you can't achieve those higher levels of thriving and meaning and purpose if you're not physically able.
Totally the example. Yeah.
And so that gives context. I was wanted to go there and ask that question, but we are investing in this project, this new product that we are just so excited about because we just found that it didn't exist. And again, it's not a knock on what does exist. There are good things out there, but trying to have something that checked all of the boxes of need that would really give people the gap filler they need in a way that nutritionally give them the gap filler in a way that wasn't so complicated. So we created it because we couldn't find it. And you mentioned briefly how that's related to meaning, but in the context of our company, our whole mission, it has been meaning and purpose. And so maybe say just a little bit more, if you would, just elaborate a little bit more your thoughts on why does it make sense to devote so much of our energy to this project?
Micronutrient.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'll start and you ask additional questions if there's something I know, but I'm not directed the right way. But we do have this belief of what starts in the gut.
Yeah.
And we said this last time, I think, when we were talking to somebody, but we live in this land of lotions and potions and everybody's got something to sell. And when we started to go down this path of nutrition, I thought, oh, no way. We're not going to do this. This makes no sense. And then it was your research, others' research, some really competent formulation, chemists and knowledgeable people in the industry. When we started to lay out all the different products and the use of, one, synthetics, and two, sprinkling of what they would use as just sprinkle inside all of these other
It's a
lotions and
marketing
potions.
gimmick to put all these things. They sprinkle stuff in there to
Amazing.
put it on the label, but it's not.
And again, they're making huge margins.
Yeah.
You know, they're manufacturing their product at a fraction of the cost that is going to take us and is taking us to create. But there is something else that really hit me hard, and that is, you know, we travel a lot. We have friends who travel, and we'll go to Europe, and all of a sudden we'll eat something that we're not supposed to eat in America, and all of a sudden our stomach's okay. And I don't have a problem with food. In fact, my problem is I can eat any food. But others may say, oh, this yeast hurts me, or I can't take this. And all of a sudden they're over there in Denmark, or they're over there in Germany or somewhere else in Bavaria, and
they can have the bread, or they can have the milk or the dairy.
Exactly. But what kind of has hit me hard, and I haven't always been this way. I mean, I'm kind of a free market guy and get out there and compete. But we've done some damage. We've done some damage to the food supply. We've done damage to soils. As I mentioned, the latter part of my teenage years, my father was in the farming industry, and I would look at the buckets and buckets and buckets of chemicals that were going in on the potatoes and in the wheat and barley, of course, alfalfa. But how it affects everything from us to the animals who consume that. And I know there was a time where, I would never even get into this discussion because, again, the free market, and we want to worry about yield, and we want to worry about ROI and rate of return. But we have depleted greatly these soils. And so something that's been fun, really fun for me, because I know we're going to be following this up with a lot of travel. As I said, I like to travel. But, we're sourcing these elements in other parts of the world, from Denmark for our fibers to, was it B12, I think, come out of Bavaria or Germany. We've got saffron, which I was doing this study on saffron. And a lot of the saffron comes from Afghanistan as well as from India. And we're getting this saffron that we could produce here, by the way, but these are the masters of creating this saffron. And I'm looking at this saying, how many different locations? And then when you add these active ingredients, the pre and post and biotics, the prebiotics and all of these active ingredients going into this mixture, I mean, we're really giving people a package of a garden.
Yeah.
And it's something you for best use anyway, you want to keep in the refrigerator,
because there's living things in there.
There's living things, and it doesn't have a shelf life of a century, or a millennium, because it's all chemicals. And I spoke a little bit about this, Robbie, but there's one thing you can't get enough of, and that's a counterfeit. You can't get enough of a counterfeit. And when you have the original and it takes care of you, whether you're running or hiking and you say, I'm going to have this good meal or this energy thing that's been created for me to recover versus, a chocolate bar, it does things differently for this body that needs the authentic.
And you gotta have that functioning if you want to experience, because ultimately meaning, right? It's largely a spiritual, and it's a feeling. I feel content. I feel at peace. I feel in control.
But it's an individual pursuit.
It is.
It's an individual pursuit, but it has those emotions as well as the tangible stuff.
Yeah, there's tangible stuff. And if you're not giving, this is tying it back to, I think, what you were saying when you before I asked the question, you started to answer this. And that is, okay, our goal is meaning and purpose. And nutrition, if you're not giving your body the things it needs so that your neurotransmitters can function the right way, so you've got enough energy to get up and do the things that fill life with richness and purpose, then it doesn't matter. Like you've got to function the way that our bodies were created to function in order to really thrive and get the most out of life and meaning. And so I'm excited about this because we are, as you articulated, we're facing some headwinds.
Yeah.
Societally and in the world with getting those things naturally, and
as well as financially.
Yes.
Very
and
much
so trying to create a better way to do that, to give people whole food sources that's tied to things that have proven to really help our bodies function and make it easy for them to use in one place. It's an unexpected focus for, I know, the company.
Totally unexpected.
But it makes so much sense.
It's a part of this journey.
Yeah.
Who would ever thought that we were dealing with meaning and we would go to the impasse of meaning, the barrier of meaning, which is addiction recovery.
Yeah.
and to learn all that we did. Those were tough 18 months. We were
yeah.
living, in a world, just giving our heart and soul to these people. And to go from there into the corporate world and to do what we've had to do with the corporate products. I mean, I know you're worried about me because the joke is that I have not ADHD, but I have Lon Henderson disorder, LEHD.
But it hasn't yet made it into the DSM.
It's not in the DSM yet, not the DSM manual. But we've had to go down this journey. And to our, success to you, our team members, the people who are around the table, they're seeing that journey wasn't just a journey because we're aimlessly going down a path, pivoting at every corner for profitability or any other, motivation. But we were going down this journey looking for ideas of truth and things that can make a difference, and coming to this point where the gateway, I know it was with my wife, it was with my mother, the gateway to a man's heart is probably through his stomach. It works that way. But the gateway to helping change some of these things that are going on in a person's soul, specifically their brain, does have to start in this complex environment, ecosystem called the gut. And we know the vagus nerve connects the two. We know that what happens in the bowels can affect the brain and help your performance. I mean, it's so obvious. We know that cell started together and then split. Mm-hmm. We know the brain looks kind of like the stomach with its intestine. I mean, there's so much even
similar. A lot of the neurotransmitters are created in the gut.
In the gut.
Yeah.
So there's all this reason why. And, the thing that's really getting me excited is we're able to help even a younger population. We've got a product that actually can go down to the youth and can help these kids who are trying to perform and make the teams and be at a camp, and their parents are good enough to stop at, some fast food joint and
throw them some calories.
Get them some calories so they can get out there and perform. But these are things that are core, core 7 specifically, that you'll benefit. And we're able and we're willing to take less profit, to do this and put less into marketing, and just believe that there's going to be a market out there that will hear it and it will resonate and recognize this element of truth.
Okay, so as we round out the conversation today, and on every conversation, we like to end with ideas and action. So what can we do? What can people who've listened to this and feel moved by some part of what we've talked about, what can they do to put these things into action and into practice in their life? 1 or 2 simple recommendations.
I know we're going to end with this, so I've given this some thought. I'm going to go back to the precursor of these 2 recommendations of another little quick, little story that when we had discovered this concept and specifically the model, and I was on with another daughter in my family, and I was going through this. I'm so excited to share it and use them as, the critics. And I was going through this. I was reading scriptures. I was reading beforehand. And I read something and I stopped and thought, Henderson, you are the worst for being creative. You know nothing. There's nothing fresh in anything that you discover. This is old, and this has been used, and this was actually a clarion call that came from, we've talked a lot about Jesus Christ. We've mentioned him a few times. But there's a scripture in Mark 12. And if you can imagine what it was, is the Savior sitting with a lot of his believers on a courtyard. They're talking. And then a scribe comes up and asks him a question. And as you read it, you actually visualize that he leaves talking with this group and he stands up and he makes this proclamation. And many people know it by the great 2, the 2 commandments. And I'm going to read it right here. He said, it says in Mark 12, I'm reading verse 28, it says, "And one of the scribes came, and having heard them reasoning together," again, Christ with his believers, "and perceiving that he had answered them well, asked him, 'Which is the first commandment of all?' Jesus answered him, 'The first of all the commandments is,'" and I see him standing up and saying, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord." So he, I believe, made this proclamation to the world. The Lord our God is one Lord. "Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, with all thy mind, and with all thy strength. This is the first commandment. And the second is like, namely this, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. There's no other commandment greater than these. And when I read that, it just jumped off the page. Spirituality, divine, and love thy neighbor. But we only call it the 2 great commandments, but there's a third one in there.
It's a hidden third.
As thyself. I don't think it's by coincidence it's last. I don't think it's by coincidence that when you do the other 2 and you love thyself, things will take care of themselves. It takes faith. It takes some action. It takes some belief. But that jumped out at me. So what would I take home from this whole thing? First of all, I would just invite people to take our model, which we went ahead and trademarked and have gone. It's our model, but we're giving it to the world. Take it, better it, share it with us of things that are successful. But take that model and apply it to your life and begin to evaluate your life. Where do I need to make some course corrections? And I think number 2 is remember, in all of this that you're doing, you got to get the gut right. You got to get the gut right. There's too much actual physical connection to that brain that with the gut right, you got an edge on attacking what you really need to attack on this very difficult planet Earth that we're all going for. And I wrapped those 2 up with something that I just feel right now, and I felt it, for years, in spite of some of the challenges we've had. Robbie, I have so much hope. I have so much hope. I have so much belief in mankind. I have so much belief in your generation and the generation 2 or 3 younger than you. I know we have so much brighter days ahead of us. We're going to battle these caustic cultural things that are going on right now, political things. We're going to overcome it, and we're going to be a stronger people. I just know that, and I'm enthused and excited and energized to be part of it. That's what I'd leave.
I love it. One of the things that you say often, and you said it here today, is the saying, little by little, a little becomes a lot. I don't know if you picked that up in Australia.
I did, yeah.
But I love that. If people are hearing this, taking these concepts and not feeling overwhelmed, but just finding one simple, small, very controllable thing that you can do to, in one of those 3 areas, even just start something little, and you'll notice that it cascades. Yeah. And it grows and the others start to follow. So just take a little bit of action in one of those areas. And I think that little by little, that will become a big change in life. So I love this.
And my hope is that's one that's there. Always remember every time we leave a podcast, because that's it. That's the secret.
That it really is.
It really is.
Across all of, whether we're talking about nutrition or mindfulness or meaning and purpose.
And we will be successful if we help people in executing that little thing.
Okay.
Yeah. Hey, it's been fun for me.
Thank you for taking this, for the good conversation and sharing wisdom and life experience. And I hope this reaches somebody and has something to offer. And we're excited for more conversations to come. And Lon will be back and we'll talk probably deeper in some of these specific topics.
If he gets one, that's a success.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Don't feel like watching from the sidelines. Yeah, I'm waking with the sunrise. Get a taste of the daylight. This time I'ma live it up. Sing it out at the top of my